This is a clip from one of our recent live streams. We stream live every Tuesday at 7 p.m. Central Standard Time. As a reminder, this is our second channel, Fish the Moment Live. Our main channel, Fish the Moment, is where we have all of our highly edited YouTube content. We spend 30 to 40 hours a week producing one YouTube video that's posted on the Fish the Moment channel every Friday at 7 a.m. Central Standard Time. These videos include on-the-water footage of us actually fishing, as well as detailed instruction on how to use electronics, fish offshore, and a lot of other great information. Make sure to check out the Fish the Moment channel if you enjoy the content on this channel. The third is a little bit more complicated though, and it's probably going to take a little while to talk about and to explain. You need to make sure that you are basically hitting the proper timing for catching big fish. And that is a kind of a broad concept, but there are certain times when big bass are more likely to eat, and you have to be prepared for those moments. And I'm going to kind of explain this topic or this concept a little bit in terms of what are some of the triggers that in timing wise that get big bass to bite, when do big bass bite more often, and also how you can prepare yourself in the lulls when they're not biting. So I'll just kind of give you one example here offshore, and then Randy will cover all the shallow stuff as well. But I'm just going to pull up a very popular lake here. We got Kentucky Lake. This is Kentucky Lake in Kentucky, Tennessee area. And basically, Kentucky Lake is called a Tennessee Valley Authority Lake, a TVA lake. And on this lake, there's a dam where they generate current, and this is one of those scenarios where you're going to have a really specific timing of when those big bass are going to bite. And that's going to be when the dam here is generating current, when they're actually pulling current. That's when those bass are going to become the most aggressive. And what you'll find is that when those bass are pulling current, those fish are going to set up on top of offshore ledges and offshore structure. So for example, here is an offshore ledge that's on the Kentucky Lake, Tennessee River, 25 feet dropping into 60 foot. This is a typical Tennessee River ledge spot. What you'll find is that when the current isn't moving, a lot of these fish will set up off the drop-off out here a little bit more suspended, or they're just going to be kind of hugged to the bottom and inactive. And you can get some of these fish to bite throughout the day, maybe by dragging a Carolina rig or a 10-inch worm or a shaky head around, maybe a drop shot. But you're not going to get a ton of big bites. You might get a few big bites here and there, one or two big bites every once in a while. But as soon as that current starts generating down here by the dam, what you'll find is that all the bass are going to start lining up on this ledge and pulling up on top of this ledge to start feeding. And I talk about this a lot more in my advanced offshore summer seminar if you guys are interested on fishmoment.com, and I get into the specifics, the science behind it, all that stuff. So check out fishmoment.com, check out the seminars, the advanced offshore bass fishing seminar for more detailed description of this. But just at the highest level, that current will start flowing and those fish will start pulling up on top of these ledges and they'll start feeding, and that's when those fish are going to bite. What this means is that when that current's not flowing, those big bass are going to be much harder to catch. You probably have a 10% chance to catch a big bass on this spot, versus when the current is flowing, you might have a 75 or 80% chance of catching a big bass off this spot. And that current might not flow all day. It might only flow for 2 or 3 hours throughout the day, maybe 30 minutes even throughout the day, when that current is flowing at the right amount and the right time to get those fish to bite. So you only have maybe a 30-minute to 1 hour window to capitalize on that big fish bite. What this means is that if you're fishing for 8 hours, 7 hours out of your day is going to be spent in that unproductive time. Now there's two ways to kind of go about this. And basically the way you can do it is you can either just sit here and camp on this spot all day and just wait for those fish to bite, wait for the current to start flowing. And a lot of guys do that. If you watch a lot of professional tournaments, if this spot has a bunch of big fish on it, literally there might be 4 or 5 boats just sitting here, basically rail to rail. It'll be like you can almost jump into each other's boats and cast on the spot. And 4 boats are casting there for 8 hours. And all of a sudden, the fish will turn on. All the guys will catch a bunch of fish, and then it'll shut off, and they'll catch like 1 fish every hour. That's kind of the way it goes. The other way to do it, which is more what I like to do, is in those 7 hours when those fish are not biting, what I like to do, if I know the current isn't running or anything, I will just basically go look for areas where I feel like big fish are located. And I'll do that by graphing offshore ledges. And a lot of times what I like to do when I go to a really popular lake like this is I'm going to graph all of the unobvious areas, the areas that aren't going to be looked at by other guys. The easiest way to do that on a lake like Kentucky Lake, especially like on a weekend, is just go graph areas where there's no other boats. And a lot of times, if you spend that 7 hours graphing, you'll be able to find a kind of an in-between school, a school that maybe no one else has found or has just moved to a new area that no one else is fishing. And then if you can use something like the TVA app, where you can actually see the current flow, current generation, or just look at like the Corps of Engineers website, you can see when that current starts kicking up, and when it starts flowing a little bit heavier, you can actually run to those areas where you found the big fish, start fishing for those fish, and you can load the boat. So that's kind of the two ways you can go about it. Now, let's say the current doesn't flow for whatever reason on your fishing day and there's no current. Well, that doesn't mean these fish aren't going to feed. What it means, though, is that if that current isn't flowing the entire day, or maybe for the last 2 or 3 days or 4 days, there's been no current generation, or let's say you're on a lake that just doesn't have a lot of current generation, that doesn't mean that these fish are not going to be aggressive or not going to eat. They have to eat to survive. But what that means is you have to start targeting bass that are more suspended off the drop. And this is where baits like the big flutter spoon I talked about earlier, things like that, can be used to trigger those suspended fish. And that's a lot more difficult, a lot trickier, and I talk about that again in the Advanced Offshore seminar. Not going to get into all that right here, but that's just something that you kind of have to then learn, is how to target those suspended fish a little bit more. And I even just posted a suspended bass seminar on the website as well, if you guys are interested in that. Now, another thing that happens a lot is if there is no current really going through your lake, you can also catch a lot of fish in offshore brush piles in the summer. So even if the current isn't going, if you can find a really thick, nice brush pile on a point or something like that, a lot of your big fish will set up there. And you're not going to catch as many fish doing the brush pile bite, but if you can run 15 or 20 brush piles and throw a jig in them or something like that in the summertime, if there's no current, this is a lot of times your best way of getting a 4 or 5 pound bite. And you may have to fish 25 or 30 brush piles throughout the day to get those fish to bite, but it definitely works really, really well. And again, on the main Fish the Moment channel, I have a whole video explaining how to fish brush piles, how to find them with your fish finder, everything like that. So just go to the main Fish the Moment channel, Fish the Moment brush piles. Just look that up on YouTube. You'll find a whole video on it. So that's kind of the high level, Randy, of the timing and what I'm talking about. How does it work up shallow? If you enjoy our videos and want more help finding bass on your home lake, head to our website, fishthemoment.com, then head to the Lake Breakdowns page. Here we offer lake breakdowns that give you 40 GPS waypoints that you can transfer straight to your fish finder on lakes all across the country. We give you detailed area descriptions, a summary of the lake, and a step-by-step guide on how to download the waypoints to your fish finder. These waypoints are picked out by professional angler Randy Blockett. We have breakdowns on lakes all across the country, broken up by season. If you can't find your lake among the list of lakes available here, we also offer personalized lake breakdowns where you can have your specific lake broken down if it's not already available. Check out our lake breakdowns on fishthemoment.com.
Well, I think there's one of the things you really have to always remind yourself is when you're talking about shallow water fishing and timing, there's a big distinction between just catching bass and catching big bass. So, if you're just out to catch bass, just keeper bass or whatever size, the timing is completely different based upon the water clarity than if you're out specifically targeting big bass. For example, let's just talk about a typical summertime pattern. If you wanted to fish a Zara spook on points in a lake that's got some pretty clean water, obviously you're going to catch more bass under low light conditions early and late in the day. But that's not the best timing time to catch big bass. So it's all relative to that. So if we're start targeting specifically on big bass, here's what I found out about timing. First of all, you got to see what type of body of water you're fishing on. Timing, it varies between, if you're fishing a tidewater river, timing is completely different. The tide has a big influence on that. If you're fishing a river type lake, say for example, like if you're fishing Lay Lake or Neely Henry in Alabama, your current flows are going to have a big impact on that. I'll say one thing about current real quick, because we had a question here from Dustin. People say, okay, I can't wait for the current to turn on because it's going to get those fish to bite. And guys, I have caught more big fish on those Alabama lakes that have current when there's no current at all than I have any time when they're pulling current. Those fish will get out on the ends of those laydowns and they're easier to catch. I've caught a lot more on that. So just wanted to throw that out there. But anyway, the timing when it comes for me to target specifically big bass in a man-made lake is there's two different considerations that I'm taking in here. Number one is the water clarity, and then number two is the type of cover that I'm fishing. And one of the things you're going to find, and this is a pretty consistent rule in bass fishing, is your bigger bass in shallow water are always going to come up in the mid part of the day. And specifically, I've every time that I've caught a big bass in the summertime of the year, I try to note the time frame on there. And there's something about that 10 o'clock to 11 o'clock period before noon. There's something about like 10 o'clock to 11 o'clock that, man, for whatever reason, that is the time where I catch more big ones shallow than any other time. Because I think a lot of it, it has to do with the angle of the sun, the way it hits the water based upon the cover and water clarity you're fishing. Because you guys know what I'm talking about. If you're out on the lake, say at 8 o'clock in the morning, you know the water looks a certain way. And then if you're back on the same spot at noon, it's got a different look to it. And then if you're there at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, it's got a different look to it. It has to do with the glare that's coming off the water, the way the shade's coming off the bank. There's a lot of different variables. So the thing that I found out more than anything is I want to be in my prime areas during that 10 o'clock in the morning to noon time frame. That's the absolute, best timing for that. Another thing that you need to consider on that are weather patterns specific to that day that you're out there. That has a big deal with timing too, because pay close attention to subtle changes within the weather. I mean, it can be, the wind can be picking up, the wind can be dying off a little bit. There's different levels of cloud coverage that come in. One of the biggest things that you want to do is if you've got a day in the summertime of the year where you've got bright sunshine right off the bat in the morning, and then all of a sudden at noon or something like that, you have a little bit of haze coming in, the cirrus clouds start picking up. It's not really cloudy, but the light intensity is different. When that light intensity changes from bright, beaten down sun to some type of a haze, not really a full overcast, to me, that's another time that I want to be in my key areas, is when you have that cloud cover change a little bit. And it's even more pronounced if it goes from sunny to cloudy during the time of the day. But overall, like I said, you have to remember, it's all about determining if you want to get bit versus if you want to catch big ones. If you want to catch big ones, you have to fish those baits up in the middle of the day, and you have to lower your expectations, your bite expectations. Because say, for example, if I'm on a whopper plopper bite, and say if I get 7 or 8 bites the first hour and a half of the morning under low light conditions, and then I go for 4 hours with no bites at all because it's gotten bright, a lot of people want to put it down, and that's the time you need to keep throwing it, because you may only get 1 or 2 bites from 9 o'clock until 4 o'clock, but they're the ones you're looking for. They're the big bass that you're looking for. But just as a general rule of thumb to remember, you're always going to get your big ones when that sun's a little bit higher in the daytime, and you're going to get more numbers under low light conditions.
It's really good stuff. And it's interesting because offshore, obviously the time of day is a really big factor as well. And what happens a lot more offshore, guys, is that with the time of day element, what you'll find is that on any offshore area in the mornings, you're going to have low light conditions, and that usually causes those offshore bass to spread out a little bit more. If you look at any area, any lake, let's say that you have this nice drop off or point here. In general, in the mornings when you have cloud cover or low light conditions, those bass will spread out across a ledge or a point, and it's a little bit trickier to get them to bite. But as the day progresses, especially into that like past 11 o'clock to like 3 o'clock, those fish are much more likely to group up, whether that's because the sun comes out and gets brighter or because you have more current from wind or from actual current generating from the lake. But in general, my best offshore bite is going to be from 11 o'clock to like 3 o'clock, just because those fish are grouping up more. Now, you still can catch some of those fish that are in that roaming stage, and if you get really heavy current in the mornings, a lot of times those fish will bite as well in the mornings. But kind of like Randy said, 11 o'clock on is really a really good time to catch big fish, but also just in general to catch fish offshore. Now, one thing I find that Randy discussed was interesting is he talked about those slight changes in weather conditions. And I don't find that those slight changes affect offshore bass nearly as much as they do the shallow water bass. Obviously, there's just more water between the bass and the surface offshore than there are up shallow. But I find that when the bass get affected offshore, it needs to be a major weather change, like going from sunny skies to super dark cloud cover, or no wind to a 15-mile-an-hour wind. A 5-mile-an-hour wind change offshore doesn't really affect those fish nearly as much as a 5-mile-an-hour wind change up shallow. Would you agree with that, Randy?
Absolutely. And I think just what you said, it has to do with light intensity, because we view light intensity from a different filter from what bass do. And I don't really know what the light intensity looks like through a bass's eyes when it's 6 inches of visibility and 3 foot of water. I mean, we can only guess. Nobody really knows what that is. But the things that I have determined is what I'm sharing here with you guys is the stuff that I have seen that comes through with regular results. It's like this isn't something that just like, happens once a year. This is something that I've put together, and I've noticed a pattern over fishing for 40 years. And it's all about bass behavior and movement. And we got so much to learn about that as far as what those fish do, specifically in shallow water. I mean, we're getting to see a lot more understanding about what bass do offshore with all the technology. But still, when you're talking about the bass that are in shallow water, these are hunter gatherers. The bass that are in shallow water are a completely different personality of bass than the ones that are out chasing shad over 60 foot of water. They're opportunistic. They blend and change to their environment, on the split second. And, I don't know if we're ever going to figure it out completely, how there are.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it's just kind of cool to see the differences too, shallow and offshore. That's what I like to show you guys on this channel. Show you Randy up shallow, myself offshore, and there's so much to learn on both ends. Last thing we want to cover here, Randy, and it's kind of related to the first two topics, but slightly different. The fourth factor we find that's really important in triggering bigger bass is finding a unique bait that no one else is throwing. Regardless if it's a big bait, a small bait, a fast-falling bait, a slow-falling bait, finding something that's different is really key a lot of times to catching bigger bass, because those bigger bass are older, they're more educated, and regardless of what anyone else thinks, bass that are bass in general will get conditioned to certain lures. If you look at the Alabama rig in 2010, 2012, whenever it released, that was the best fish catching tool for like 2 years. You could literally just go throw it down any bank, anywhere, any time of year and catch giant fish. It was really, really easy to catch fish on the Alabama rig. Now, it's still really good, but it's definitely situational. It's not nearly as effective as it was. And I find the same thing happens with a lot of baits. When I first started fishing this big flutter spoon in 2012, 2013, this thing absolutely crushed them any lake I would go to offshore. Same thing with a hair jig. Those fish just hadn't seen it. They weren't accustomed to it. And I was winning tournaments, Randy, when I was in high school and college, just for the fact that I was throwing baits that no one else had access to. I would just get them from friends, or I'd order them online or whatever, and they just weren't in the local tackle shops, and I could just win tournaments just off of that alone. Now it's a little bit trickier, but there's still a subset of baits, or just like a set of popular baits that guys throw. And one easy way to check this, and this isn't the foolproof way to do it, obviously, but two ways to kind of check this out is you just go to Tackle Warehouse and just go to the top sellers. I do this all the time. Top selling tackle. I just look at what baits people are throwing, and I basically just try to stay away from all these baits that everyone has up here on the website. I just don't throw these baits that much, especially if I know I'm fishing on a highly pressured lake. Now, do I catch fish on 6XD crankbait and stuff like that, and any of these baits, a Senko in this time of year? Of course, I definitely do. But if I'm fishing for bigger fish and I want to really target those better than average fish and want to separate myself from the pack, I'm just going to stay away from these top-selling lures, and I'm also going to go to the tackle shop and I'm going to say, hey, what's selling really well? Or just go to the pegs on the store shelves. Well, maybe not right now because there's no baits on store shelves anywhere anyways, but before there was supply issues, basically just go to the shop and see what everyone is buying, what are the most popular colors, stuff like that. And I would do this all the time back in the day. I would just go buy like the ugliest looking color that no one, it was like overfilled. The whole like peg was completely like overflowing because no one had bought them. Those are the colors I went and bought. And I find that that really, really helped, having a unique color, a unique bait. It's not the biggest impactor of the four we've talked about. It's probably the least important. But it's definitely something that can give you an advantage. What do you think, Randy?
Well, that's what I was just getting ready to say for the shallow aspect of it. To me, the color is the biggest trigger as far as getting those bigger fish to hit. I mean, it you can use. I mean, we talked about the variation in different lures and different lure profiles, and when you're using a specific set of lures with a specific color set. You may get a big bass haphazardly or randomly occasionally, but one of the things I've noticed that you have a definite reproducible result, you see a definite trend towards bigger bass is colors. And one of the things that I found out that triggers bigger bass in shallow water to hit is you have to go bright. Because I can't tell you guys how many times that, I've spent hundreds of days fishing Grand Lake in the middle of the summertime, cranking rock. And you can go out at Grand Lake in the summertime of the year and say, for example, if you throw a shad pattern crankbait shallow, you may catch 20 bass and all of them are, a pound and a half to 2.25. But if you go out there and throw a bright chartreuse bait in the same water, you may only catch 3 or 4 bass, but, you're going to have a couple 4-pounders in there with that bright color. And I have noticed that over and over and over again is you lose your number of bites by going bright, but you upgrade your size. The same with a spinnerbait is, you can use some type of a shaddy colored spinnerbait, translucent skirt, just some type of a shad pattern. And then if I go to like a solid chartreuse skirt, not necessarily upsize the bait any, but just go to the brighter skirt, the grade of fish size that I catch start to go up. Another thing is with jigs. I'll give you guys some juice here. I don't share very often. Shallow water fishing is not many people use a black and yellow or black and chartreuse jig anymore. It was more popular 30 years ago, but it's not now. One of the biggest triggers for shallow water jig fishing in the summertime is using a black jig with a lot of chartreuse or a lot of yellow in it. There's something about that bright flash that will definitely get the bigger bass. You lose your bites. You don't get as many bites as like on a brown or black and blue. But when I'm after those quality fish in the summertime of the year, I've always got some type of chartreuse on whatever bait I'm using.
Randy, to your point there, this is actually really funny because while you're talking about that jig color, I was looking at top selling page on Tackle Warehouse. You have the Dirty Jigs tour level pitching jig, a flipping jig just like Randy was talking about. Just to give you guys a perspective on this, look at this. Do you see a black and chartreuse jig? Nope. Nope. Look how many colors there are in this jig, Randy, and not a single one of them is black and chartreuse. There's literally like 45 jig colors, and none of them are black and chartreuse. Not even a single one. So like
Tommy Biffle would probably get mad at me for sharing that tip because he's like a fanatic on the black and chartreuse and black and yellow.
Well, that just blows my mind just to show you that there's no, like the best-selling jig on Tackle Warehouse, it's not... It doesn't have that color. It doesn't come in that color. And I tie a lot of my own skirts, guys, on my jigs as well, especially when I'm not using the Fish Mowing Offshore jig. I put all my favorite color skirt combinations on that thing. But what I do is I'll go to lure customization. I know Randy does this too. And you can go to replacement skirts and just buy tabs of skirting material. And I just buy all of these Skirts Unlimited tabs. I like the flatline rubber. This stuff is really, really cool. Gives a little bit different profile. And I'll tie my own jigs with the black or with the dark brown, Fisher green. I have all these colors. That is really cool. And then you can find some really bright colors in this stuff as well. With your chartreuse and your black, you get a lot of good colors in here. So I always love throwing my own jig skirts on. And I know that's something that you do as well, Randy, is always experimenting with different color skirts, just messing around, changing it up. It makes a big difference. It really, really does a lot of times, especially up shallow, especially even more.
Yeah, it's all, color is a huge deal. I mean, I think a lot of people, they don't excuse me, they don't really know how to or what to think about color, because you hear on one side of the coin that like color's not that big of a deal, just keep it simple, stay with the basics. But I'm here to tell you guys, color is huge. I mean, I have seen color make a massive difference. I've seen subtle color changes make a big difference in every single lure category out there. And like Johnny says, tying your own skirts is one way that not only you can adapt it to the water clarity changes, but it boosts your confidence tremendously. Not no, just knowing nobody else has that particular color out there.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely something to check out, guys, with tying your own jig skirts. Maybe we'll do a video about that, Randy. That'll be a good video to talk about like our favorite. I have like 3 or 4 sneaky jig skirt things. I do some stuff on chatterbaits and stuff with some old school flatline rubber, stuff like that. I have some stuff that from back in the day I would do a lot. I always was messing with stuff when I was like, especially like high school, college. I had extra time on my hands, so I just would try crazy skirt combinations. I have every color tab of all these skirt manufacturers, throw it all together, and some of it worked, some of it did not work, but it was fun to do either way.
I'll tell you, black and chartreuse used to be a big color when I started fishing. How many of you guys out there remember the old tube worm? I remember back when I was like a senior in high school, there was this worm called a tube worm, and it was a fat plastic worm, and this was even before tubes were around. This was like tubes didn't exist then, but it had the tube tentacle tails on this worm, and it came in black and chartreuse. I can't tell you how many hogs I caught on that thing, on that color, and then we just quit throwing it. And it just used to be a major big color, and it just sort of got left by the side for some reason.
Yeah, and a lot of you guys are asking here, does color really matter? I made a video explaining how I feel like color doesn't really matter as much as other things. Like, for example, if you're not fishing around fish, it doesn't matter if you have the perfect color. If there's no fish in the area, you're not going to catch them anyways. I've always said that. I've always talked about that. The bait doesn't really matter if you're not around fish. So obviously, the most important thing for me is you need to be around fish. You need to be fishing the right water with the right scenarios, stuff like that, to actually hold fish and have catchable fish. But once you get that dialed in, you get to the point where you know where the fish are, you can definitely increase the number of fish you catch on a good area by changing color, profile, all these different things. It's just one of those things where it's not putting on a black and chartreuse jig is not going to take you from catching 0 fish to catching 10 fish. It might take you from catching 6 fish to catching 9 fish, though. So if you're already catching them, you're going to potentially catch more fish. But it's not going to be the magic bullet that helps you go from sucking and not catching anything to catching a bunch of fish. Would you agree with that, Randy?
Yeah, and that's what fishing is when you're talking about, lure modifications, lure colors, lure profiles. You're talking about incremental advantages here, because in a tournament situation, just catching 1 to 3 more bass a day is a big deal. And if you can make those subtle color changes, that's what makes the difference between guys that get a check in a tournament and guys that don't get any money.
So anyways, Randy, that is pretty much it. That was the, tips for triggering big bass in the summertime. Any other thoughts to leave guys with to finish up the stream?
Yeah, I think, for the shallow water deal, guys, the thing to just remember is, like I said, try to focus your efforts during the middle of the day. Try to fish those baits that, will catch the big ones, like the big worms, top waters, big square bill crankbaits. Stay with your bright colors. And that sort of gives you a better odd than just lucking into one. But it's not easy to catch big ones shallow in the summer. I mean, that's not the time that there's a lot of big ones shallow, but you can still catch them occasionally by doing that.
For sure. And for those offshore fish guys, those big giant flutter spoons, big giant crankbaits, it's getting to be a deal offshore where a lot of guys are catching them on really small stuff and really, really big stuff offshore. There's not a lot in between anymore that's working, at least for me recently. So it's kind of interesting. All the fishing pressure out offshore is really putting the hurting on those fish. So we'll keep making videos about that, guys. Got a lot of really great content coming up. Really excited to share, guys, all the new videos, all the things we're doing. Sorry for the lack of videos on the main channel, by the way, for those who are our loyal viewers. I've been working on a bunch of different stuff. I got a really cool project I've been working on. Can't quite talk about it yet. I've shared it with a few people on seminars and stuff, but it's a really big project that I'm working on for almost 2 years, and we're ramping it up to finish it up. So I'm very excited about that. And then also been trying to train up someone to help with video editing. So between training people on editing and this other project, I don't have enough time to actually edit the videos myself, so we're going to get back on the grind, get more videos out to you guys. I have a video I filmed June 1st, Randy, that I haven't posted yet, and it's almost July, and it's really depressing because, like, I want to get these videos out, but, like, I just don't have time, so we're gonna get back on the grind, but I kind of took a month to focus on other big things. You guys are going to like what the end result is, so appreciate the patience on that, and anyways, just appreciate all the support, guys. Big shout out again to Bridgeford for sponsoring the podcast and just supporting bass fishing in general. And shout out to Randy for joining and talking to this young offshore addicted guy, teaching me some lessons about shallow water fishing. So thanks again, Randy.
Yeah, thanks for tuning in, everybody. Appreciate you guys taking a little time out of your Tuesday night to join us, and hope to see you guys next week.
Sounds good. See you guys next week, 7 p.m. Central Standard Time, back here on the Fish Moment Live channel. Have a good night. Also, see you tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. on the main Fish Moment channel for that mega live video. Go check it out. Anyways, thanks, guys. Have a good night. Thanks for checking out the video. If you made it this far, we'd really appreciate if you left a like on the video. It helps us out with the YouTube algorithm and gets these videos out to more people. Also consider subscribing. It's free and it lets you get notifications of every single one of our videos that we upload daily. Finally, remember to check out the main Fish the Moment channel, where we actually have on-the-water fishing footage as well as detailed graphics on electronics, offshore fishing, bass behavior, and a lot of other great information. Thanks for checking out the video, and we'll see you all in the next one.